Plan and define project scope. This training will ensure you understand what you need to know when defining and managing project scope. In this course, you'll learn how to plan a scope management and use the collect requirements process. You'll also learn how to produce your project scope statement with the defined scope process. Plan and define project scope. So so your project is all approved and you're ready to get started. What's the first step? You need to figure out exactly what the end of the result is going to look like based on the customer needs. In this course, you'll learn how to plan scope management for your project, use the collective requirements, process to gather and define stakeholder requirements, and how to turn those into your scope statement with the defined scope process. Define project scope. This define everything you need to do get them from objectives to the result. If you change the project scope, it's likely to have the implication for the project cost, time, and quality. Nakadepende po yung cost and time quality para sa paggawa ng project scope. Project scope is defined as well the work required to complete a project deliverables. So, yung project scope which is all the work required complete. By making it clear exactly what is required, you also clear it what's not required. So, yun din po, nakadepend so yun sa project ko which is kung ano talaga yung kailangan or yung hindi. The plan scope management process will guide you in establishing exactly what work your team needs to carry out in order to project to be successful. Kung ano ba talaga yung pinakakailangan para yung isang project ay maging successful. The purpose of this process is to create a scope management plan that documents the project scope well defined, validated, and controlled. The scope management plan is component of overall project management plan and provide guidance and direction on how the scope will be managed throughout the project. So, ito yung magiging guide para sa pag-uo ng isang project ko or pag-uo ng isang project. Begin with an analysis of the information found in the project charter. It provides rationale for the project how will be met the customer needs. Kung kung siya yung magiging ba yan? Daan or isang guide ba para yung business or yung customers need pag ginamit na yung isang product or services. It also contains the project objectives, general description, kung para saan talaga yung isang project or kung para saan yung yung isang product or services features. Considering business needs and desired feature are the first step in determining what the product will look like and plotting the scope of the project. Kung ano ba yung kakalabasan ng isang product, kung para saan ba yun or kung ano talaga yung pinakagamit or ng isang gagawin na product or services. The specific components of the project management plan are the quality management plan, project life cycle, description, and development approach. Quality policies and standards are life cycle and methodologies which as driven versus eagle search as employs the project plan management plan. In planning scope management, the project manager will need to comply the organization policy and procedure. So, kung pag nagpaplano ka ng scoop or so kailangan dapat ma-meet mo yung mga organizational policies and procedure which will influence how work is planned and carried out. So, kasi makakapag-impluwensya yun sa mga plano tsaka yung kakalabasan nito. The tools and techniques for the plan scope management process are the expert judgment or meetings and data analysis. Use expert judgments to determine scope was managed and similar projects and to capitalize on the expertise of others. So, kung gagamitin mo yung expert judgment para yung dun mo i-base yung isang product o services na uh, na ginagawa mo or kailangan i-judge siya ng kung pwede ba yon or applicable ba yon. Based on information about your current project found in a project charter and project management, you will examine record from several past projects. So, the goal of plan scope management process is to produce two case documents, the scope management plan and the requirements management plan. The scope management plan is maybe broadly based or detailed depending on the needs of the project. So kahit malaki siya or pero depende pa rin yung sa kung ano talaga yung kailangan ng stakeholders or ng user about sa project or ng na project na gagawin. Plan scope management is the first process in the scope management knowledge area. You are use expert judgment and meetings to create 2K documents, the scope management plan and the requirements plans, both of which are subsidiary plans within the project management plan. So ito yung dalawa para gagamitin mo para makabuo ka siya ng parang panimula muna para makapagsimula ka ng isang project or services na nais mong gawin. Input to collect requirements. Requirements are function of feature or product we must have, as well as the needs of stakeholder wants to meet the project's final result. The input for the collecting requirements process include the project charter. The project charter identifies high-level requirements. It also provides high-level description of product or services a project must have delivered. So, kailangan kung yung project charter na identify the high-level requirements and the high-level and can also provide the high-level description of a product or services. This scope management plan provides the direction on how the project team should be determined which type of requirement needs to be collected. So scope management yun yung ginagamit din kung bigay ng direction, makapag-determine po ng types of requirements na kailangan i-collect or ibigay dun sa sa isang product o services. The requirements management plan outlines process that will be used to define the document stakeholder needs. The stakeholder management plan details stakeholder communication requirements as the label of the stakeholder. Input the planning scope management is a project documents including the assumption log, lesson learned register kung ano ba yung mga nalaman doon, kung ano yung mga lesson na naka-register, and the stakeholder register. The stakeholder register list of stakeholder for the project. Yung mga list ng mga stakeholder na sa isang project. The project result must be met their needs. So you need to consult stakeholder for detailed information about the requirements. So kung kailangan may idagdag gusto mong idagdag, so kailangan mo kausapin yung mga stakeholders. Other inputs include the business documents such as business case, agreements, relevant enterprise, environmental factors, organizational process and assets. Tools and technique for collecting requirements. Data gathering techniques include brainstorming. We will cover in details in a moment. They also include conducting interviews in stakeholders, subject matter expert, and people who work in these related projects. These people can help you identify what feature, function, or product or service should have. So, kailangan mo ng data gathering para kung may gusto ka bang idagdag or sa isang service o ano. Tapos, maidadagdag mo siya para mas lalong ma-improve sa pamagitan pag-interview sa mga nagtrabaho na dati sa related works like kung related yung taon dati pang trabaho siya sa ibang company which is related sa ginawa mong isang project. Benchmarking is another data gathering technique and involves studying how other organizations create similar products and identify best practice and new innovation. So, yung parang benchmarking is parang nagde-date isang siya ng technique para makapag-gather ka ng isang data or halimbawa may isang kang gagawin ng isang product or services na kailangan mo improve, kailangan mo ng mag-research or mag-study ba para mas ma-innovate mo pa yung isang product or services. Brainstorming allows you to generate and capture many ideas about project product requirements. Brainstorming is a great way to generate and structure list and possible project requirements. This is because it encourages everyone in group to have their say, and what one person say often inspires everyone else with a new idea. So sa brainstorming, so halimbawa, mas ma-improve mo pa yung isang product o services by means of other saying and para other saying tsaka or ma-inspire ka para mas ma-inspire na mas lalo mo pang ma-innovate yung isang product or services sa pamagitan ng brainstorming or ma-upgrade nyo pa yung isang item ay isang product or services dahil sa mga sa pamagitan ng brainstorming. The purpose of brainstorming session will be a clarify earlier set of requirements. So, kung yung isang brainstorming din daw, makaka-clarify niya pa yung halimbawa may naunang mga requirements which is pag-uusapan nyo kung applicable po ba yun dun o hindi. Observation is a unique way of identifying requirements. Watching how task a process is performed can make you aware of requirements you shouldn't have. Though otherwise, job shadowing is a form of observation and involves watching a person or a group of people as they perform their job. This is especially useful for complication process, which when the people who will use the product or service will find difficult to clearly express or the requirement. So yun, pag-obserbahan mo ba kung yung by observation mute, kung ba, yung mga yung services or product which is kung na-meet ba ng product or services yung requirements ng user or yung ng stakeholders or lahat ba yun ay naiintindihan nila or mahirap ba o yun obserbahan mo kung applicable ba yun or hindi. Interpersonal and team skills are another group of techniques scale or effective and several methods including requirements gathering, and there are several methods including the nominal group technique, observation, conversation, and facilitation. So yung isang technique para effect requirements Yung by technique, observe mo sila, facilitate or pag-facilitate para ma-improve yung skills nila sa isang kung paano paggamit nito or ng isang services or product. First, we will discuss the nominal group of technique. It is a prioritization tool that lets you guide a group of stakeholders in identifying which requirements are the most important. That the technique can be include the brainstorming ideas and ranking them, or you already use by technique like brainstorming. It can involve ranking of least impossible project requirements that you will be already put together. A facilitation involves in creating an atmosphere or trust among participants, typical during workshop to elicit the appropriate information for collecting requirements. Effective facilitation can build a maintain trust, foster relationship, and open communication between the project team members. So, ito, halimbawa may isang para may isang project. So, facilitation which is halimbawa para coordinate yung lahat yung lahat ng mga requirements which is mabibigay nila lahat dun sa para ma-facilitate nila yung or ma-met nila yung requirements ng ng isang services or product. There are two other tools and technique for collecting requirements. The context diagram are the useful model to input and output of the system and all the people surrounding its use. The prototype are the most useful. Project must deliver something will people use to complete the task. So, yung context diagram which is the input-output lang po or kung ano lang po yung which is hindi pa kung ano lang yung pwede maibigay which is the input-output of the system. Ang prototype naman, you choose the actual project or na pwedeng magamitin ng isang user or ng customer. Characteristics of effective requirements. For a project to meet agreed requirements, there must be a way to access whether the requirements are being met. So each requirement has to measurable. It must be answer question like how much, how many, and how well. It also be testable, so that our objective way to verify it. If a requirement is testable, you can verify whether it has been met. There are examples of some of the techniques you could use to verify requirements. Demonstrate how a product works to verify its functioning as required. Observe a product or service being used. To verify that it's performed as required in practice, examine a product to verify it was agreed or features. As well being measurable, testable, our requirements must be traceable forward and back. You must be able to track it is a work proceed to you so you know what is has been met and the end of that project. You must also be able to look back and identify exactly how a requirement must met or why wasn't. So, kung hindi man halimbawa yung isang project or services tinest mo tapos may mali which is pwede mo balikan kung saan ba siya saan ba yung mali pwede mo balikan siya para i-check. The product requirements will be clear, measurable, and testable and traceable. Output of the collect requirements. The collect requirements process has two main outputs. These are the requirements documentation and the requirements readability matrix. The requirements documentation is all about details about the requirements you want to record during the meeting with stakeholders. Details like rationale behind why they were worth prioritized, like the were all of the agreed upon attributes for each requirement. This give of all the agreed upon attributes on you could use to monitor and control a project throughout its life cycle. The level of the detail of the requirement documentation will differ from different projects for the documentation to for things. So, requirement documentation which is uh, nito, lahat ng mga requirements which is documented or nakalista or naka documented. Requirements should be grouped in by stakeholders or stakeholder to categorize stakeholders from the based on their priority. This helps ensure you can trace requirements easily and give project work based on which ones are the most important. It is a good idea to document the business needs to road project objective that are requirements satisfy. This is sure that the stakeholder and the project team know what the overriding objective or requirements is to be met. A requirements is component can be functional, non-functional, or quality related. In other words, it relates how a product or services must function to features that don't affect the underlying operation or to perform in the standard or must satisfy. So, kailangan yung requirements or mas hindi siya nakaka-apekto or mas lalo pa niya tinaas or mataas pa yung performance pa. Uh, Tsaka satisfy yung mga yung stakeholder or user. Identify the broad type of each requirements helps you determine the aspect of project work that are needed to be met. So, kung ano daw yung kailangan dapat ma-met or it's important to document any assumption and constraints on which requirement is based. Requirement process. A requirement use feasibility matrix is a table displays it contains 5 columns and 2 rows. The 5 columns headers and ID requirements description, back visibility, forward visibility, and status. This is able to assign each requirement a unique ID number, list of requirements, and description in its status. It also lets you know relay each requirement back to border and objectives and forward to the more detailed requirement spaces must met. The requirements traceability matrix has 3 main processes. It ensures all each requirement add value to the project by linking it back to the business need of objective it helps satisfy. It tracks requirements including their status throughout the project, and it provides a structure for managing of the scope of a project so these changes don't result to requirements not being met. In summary, the outputs of the collective requirements are the requirements documentation and the requirements traceability matrix. The requirements documentation identify each requirement and its attributes. The requirements traceability matrix is tool to use the track requirements throughout the project. Technique for defining scope. The defined scope process is what you use to arrive and documented agreement about exactly what the project will include. It involves documenting objectives, deliverables, and requirements is enough detail to guide the rest of the project. The defined scope process occurs in the project course process occurs early in the project stage after you have developed the project charter and collective requirements before you create the WBS or work breakdown structure and form process related to planning schedule. It involves progressive elaboration. This means refining, expanding, and work far from information you have gathered and the work you have done in the project. The defined scope process have five inputs. The project charter provides high-level description of project and the product services. As a result, it must be delivered. It outlines basic requirements and expectation, assumption, constraints, risk, defining scope, involves elaborating what's in the project charter. First is the expert judgment. Defining project scope requires expert judgment or judgment based on the specialized needs. That's because it involves assisting the requirements as they are described in the inputs, such as a project charter and requirements documentation, and determine implication for the rest of the project. Data analysis technique used is an Alternative analysis focus on coming up with the alternative ways that work can be done by meet the requirements. It involves thinking creatively and different ways to meet the project deliverables. So, kailangan yung data analysis which is our technique on para magawa yung isang requirements para ma-meet nila yung requirements need ng customer at saka customer. The method of decision making technique used is a multi-criteria decision analysis. Multi-criteria decision analysis involves a systematic approach using a matrix to determine the best decision. So, pag decision making which technique is used to para kung ano talaga yung which is tama or yung mali na ilalagay na mga criteria or mga needs ng isang product or services. Yung facilitation skill, you bring together cross-functional stakeholder, people who use interest in project deeper workshop format. You guide the group to think creatively to come up with the solution and reach consensus. You should use this technique to elaborate on what a product must be like or what work project must include to meet the requirement. The fourth important tool is defining scope or product analysis. It's by analyzing a product uh, analyzing the project or deliverable that you determine exactly what is the attribute features they must have. In other words, the required product scope. Many different methods are useful for product analysis. Auto-defined scope. Uh, the main auto-defined scope is a process of project scope. This is like an official agreement among all the project and stakeholder. It explicitly identifies what would and what be included in the deliverables. Kung ano pala yung kung alin yung hindi or yung mga pwede include sa isang project which is deliverable o can deliver. Pwede siya i-deliver ng maayos. The project scope must have four main purposes. It defines work that will go to project through progressive elaboration. This means it refines the expands on what the team already know from the project and charter and requires the documentation. It also fits the process of creating the detailed work breakdowns structure where further progressive elaboration occurs. The scope statement guides the project team and makes it clear what would want go into a project. It describes the deliverable, what must be created, and work effort and methods required to do this. It also assists us. It also sets a baseline. The scope statement is one of the documents against which progress and change requests will be evaluated. It forms a part of the scope and baseline for a project. The project scope statement make it clear to stakeholder what they can expect to receive and what they can form of project. It's against those expectations and successful will be measured. The other output of defining scope process is project document update. Yung mga yung mga bago sa mga updates sa documents or mga hindi na dinagdag na mga requirements. The process of analyzing all the components that go into the scope statement can be made clear where new requirements or changes existing or ones are necessary. So, documents you may update are the assumption log, requirements documentation, requirements traceability matrix, and stakeholder register. Components of project scope management. The product scope description identifies all the attributes and deliverable must meet the requirements. So, dapat yung ng product scope description dapat nami-meet niya po yung uh, or na-identify niya yung all the attributes which is deliverable. The product scope description is an important input for later process. A description of project developer is another important component. This makes it clear what stakeholders should expect to receive throughout the project and the project's close. So, kung yung project description, siya yung pinaka-important, which is yun yung pinaka-final judges ng stakeholder na kung hanggang sa stable ba yung process or yung habang gumawa at saka yung pagkatapos ng isang product or system kung ano talaga yung project requirements, yun siya yung nasusunod or hindi nadadagdagan o hindi nasusobrahan. So, stable. The component of the scope statement is definition of the project exclusion. The project exclusion section is where you identify what deliverables won't include. In other words, scope exclusion, this is to ensure stakeholders agree about what the project won't be delivered. So, kung po, may mga hindi na details or may mga requirements na so, kailangan alam ng stakeholders, tsaka agree po sila dun kahit hindi nakalagay yung ibang requirements. So, dapat kahit sikapin natin all the requirements kailangan ng system or ng product ng mga requirements, dapat mailagay natin siya para matawag natin yung scope po ng planning natin ay tama at saka tugma. A project scope statement should also include the product acceptance criteria. There are the standard stakeholder that project team agree to use to judge whether the project deliverables have not met requirements. These criteria play an important role of the project or any of its phases. This is used to vary scope and confirm completion and acceptance of deliverable is important detailed product acceptance criteria. So, dapat yung isang product or system dapat may criteria or may sinusundan siya para ma-meet niya yung 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 customers needs and stakeholder na mga requirements na or mga requirements na naka-include dun sa sa isang scope of planning or isang project.